Greetings Moto Guys and Moto Gals, and welcome back to the 333. Amazingly, I'm just about to hit the 5,000 mile mark on my 2021 Yamaha Tenere 700. I did my first full review at the 1,000 mile mark, and since that time, a lot has happened on this bike. Surprisingly, or maybe not, the 1,000 mile review video also proved to be my most controversial one to date, with the highest number of downvotes. Yamaha loyalty definitely runs true in blue. So do I still have the same opinions of this bike now that I've racked up 5,000 miles of eating gravel, sand, mud, and carving into asphalt? Stay tuned and let's get into it. Nope, you're not hallucinating. That last clip was indeed a Yamaha Tenere 700, ridden by the amazing Paul Tarras. Paul is quickly becoming a favorite in the moto community, and for obvious reasons. The dude is a straight up beast of a rider, and the feats he pulls off on a full-size 450-pound Tenere adventure bike are simply mind-blowing. He rides it like it's a 250-pound dirt bike. I included this clip because it graphically illustrates more than anything else how awesome and versatile the Yamaha Tenere 700 is. My initial review at the 1,000 mile mark was admittedly a bit tough. I tried to keep things honest, and unfortunately I think some viewers interpreted this as an unfair negative assault on a really awesome adventure bike. Guilty as charged, and hopefully I can amend some of that in this review. My path with the T7 did not really get off on an easy foot. After I read about the Tenere back in 2018, I became really intrigued with the bike and changing direction a bit in my personal motorcycling journey. My first 3 years of riding were all spent on naked sport bikes and asphalt. First on my trusty red Honda CB500F, and then to the Beezer, the bike you all know and love, the awesome Honda CB1000R. Naked bikes are a lot of fun to ride for sure, but there are also some inherent downsides to them as well. For one thing, they're not very comfortable, especially for all-day riding trips. Second, you're pretty much limited to riding them on decent asphalt or at worst super hard-packed gravel roads if you dare. Lastly, and let's be honest here, just by their nature, naked bikes constantly beg you to crack the throttle and ride them in a spirited humor. Not great when playing the odds against traffic violations or potential road mishaps. So when I thought about where I wanted this two-wheel odyssey to take me, I kept returning to all the basic things I have enjoyed throughout my life. I've always loved being active, athletic, and doing things outdoors, especially hiking. I've hiked Red Rock, Nevada, Zion, Utah, and even in Iceland, and I really wanted a bike that would better fit with these interests, and allow me to travel to those places that are off the beaten path. Maybe even allow me to eventually moto camp at some point. As a kid, I regularly rode dirt bikes in the South Jersey Pinelands, first on a late 70s Yamaha MX100, and then on a Honda 200X three-wheeler. So I already had some level of basic off-road experience to build upon. Full-sized adventure bikes always just seemed like overkill to me, and I could never imagine trying to navigate a 600 plus pound bike in off-road conditions. A few years back, adventure bikes were sort of like the dad jeans of motorcycling. Most GS 1250 riders were more likely to navigate their bikes to the local Starbucks than to a BDR. But soon after getting my M endorsement, I began to notice a few changes swirling around adventure biking and the riding community's changing perspective on it. The first thing was the wildly popular riding series called Long Way Down, where Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman rode two BMW adventure bikes from Scotland all the way down to South Africa. The series sparked a ton of interest and inspiration for a lot of riders. The second was Yamaha's announcement that they would be bringing a mid-level adventure bike to the market, with the goal of attracting riders who would never consider riding an adventure bike that was north of 500 pounds. With a lean mean curb weight of 450 pounds and many of the same features of much larger, pricier European bikes, the T7 generated a ton of interest right out of the gate, and I was immediately hooked on the idea of owning one as a second bike in my stable. I went to the 2019 IMS show in New York City with the sole purpose of getting up close and personal with this elusive unicorn of an adventure bike. The first challenge with the T7 was even getting my hands on one. Shortly after it was revealed at the IMS show in December of 2019, the pandemic hit and the world basically shut down after March of 2020. I reached out to my Yamaha dealership, but they were not even anticipating taking orders for the T7 until July of 2020. They agreed to take an early deposit from me for a first chance to buy one, and would notify me once they had more information on shipping dates. When all was said and done, it ended up being October of 2020 before I finally took delivery of the bike. Whenever I do bike reviews on my channel, I like to break them down into 3 parts. First, the bad stuff, then the good stuff, and finally the neutral or things to be aware of stuff when you're considering the bike. When I did my 1,000 mile review of the bike back in April of this year, there were some negative things I commented on that I think are worth revisiting again at the 5,000 mile mark. My first criticism of the bike at the 1,000 mile mark was all the hype surrounding its release. I questioned whether it was really worthy of all the hoopla. In general, I'm not a fan of overhyping anything, not just motorcycles. And so I felt at that point that although it was a great bike, it was not worthy of all the press it was getting. And now at the 5,000 mile mark, my opinion has changed a bit on this. The bike is indeed pretty special, and for a solid 3 years, nothing has really even come close to competing with it at its price point and performance level. It's a true mid-size adventure bike, extremely capable of navigating challenging off-road terrain, while being an amazing performer on the asphalt as well. The only other ADV bike that is a possible option in its class is probably the Honda CB500X, but with far less horsepower, torque, and nowhere near the suspension or off-road capabilities of the T7, there's really nothing to compare. The Honda is a solid little ADV bike for sure, but it's not a T7, not even close. Other manufacturers are starting to reveal their models designed to compete directly with the T7, most notably Aprilia and Husqvarna. But the production versions of these bikes are still proving to be heavier and more expensive, along with their already sketchy European reliability reputations. If you think getting parts for the T7 is challenging, have fun getting them for an Aprilia. So the T7 is still holding its spot as the best priced middleweight leader. KTM and Triumph certainly offer some awesome adventure bike options in the middleweight class, but they are still considerably more expensive than the T7. The only challenge on the horizon that I possibly see would be if Honda makes good on the rumors and releases its updated version of the legendary Trans Alp, effectively giving us that elusive, affordable baby Africa twin so desired by the adventure riding community. But with the current global supply chain nightmare, I can't see this being a real option any sooner than 2023. So is the T7 worthy of all the press and long backorder times? Based on how much I love this bike now, I gotta say, yeah, it really is. The next negative thing I ranted about at the 1,000 mile mark was the quality of the stock accessories and components on the T7, most notably the OEM handguards and skid plate. I felt at the time that Yamaha had used a bit of marketing smoke and mirrors to keep the price down on the T7. Although the bike appears to be well equipped at first glance, the accessories are so poor that you end up using up the cost savings and buying better quality aftermarket parts. After I posted that opinion, some of my viewers, subscribers, and T7 owners expressed some valid rebuttals to my perspective. For one thing, most of Yamaha's competitors are not even including basic low-cost accessories like handguards or skid plates on their bikes, and those bikes are already more expensive than the T7. And with regard to the skid plate, yes, it is a bit on the thin side, but for a large percentage of T7 owners who may only be taking their bikes on the occasional rough road or double track, it works perfectly fine. You'll only really need to upgrade it if you plan on taking the bike into more challenging off-road situations. And this would be the same for any off-road bike. As for the handguards, well, yeah, they aren't super protective, but Yamaha really designed them to be wind guards, not full-on crash protection. The bike does come stock with decent bar ends on it, and I discovered that by combining the stock wind guards with the super strong Hepco Becker bar guards, it makes for a really nice combination of both wind and crash protection. So yeah, they aren't great off the shelf, but with a minor tweak they can be improved considerably, and I'm super happy with them now. Another aspect of the bike that I was pretty unforgiving on during the 1,000 mile review were some design flaws with the bike that could lead to major headaches during ownership, most notably the exhaust can hanger, It's part of the bike's subframe and it's vulnerable to being bent or broken if the bike is dropped on its right side. Although I do still think this is a design problem that Yamaha should improve on future versions of the T7, it has not proven to be much of an issue, at least not for me. I've dropped the bike at least 15 times off-road now, some of them on the right side, and although the pipe hanger has gotten slightly wonky, it was nothing catastrophic. And if it is really worrisome to you, there are now 2 or 3 aftermarket companies that are making really nice high mount solutions. The other design flaw I noted back in April was the exposed nature of the water pump on the CP2 engine. It could certainly be punctured if dropped on a well-angled rock. Having installed Touratech's solid lower crash guards, I personally have not encountered this being a huge issue, although I'd still love to see Yamaha include at least a well-placed nylon deflector plate around the water pump. It would not add to the cost of manufacturing the bike, and would probably eliminate many of those unfortunate punctures suffered by new riders who drop their bikes the first time they venture off-road, at least until they get proper crash protection installed. So I've eaten some crow here and walked back a couple of my earlier harsh criticisms that I made on the bike back in April. But there are still a couple of new issues that I've run into that Yamaha can improve on the T7, especially for those of us who don't just ride our bikes to Starbucks on Sunday mornings. First off is the bike's plastics. They're just too brittle and break really easily. I found this out the hard way when I looped my bike into a pine tree during an off-road training class in the spring and did about $900 in damage. Many of the parts that failed were the bike's plastics. They basically cracked like eggshells at all the fastening points. I think Yamaha should make these parts out of high-impact plastic, like the kind used on their formal YZ motocross bikes, and beef up the fastening points. The fork boots on the T7 in particular are very weak and crack very easily, and this is a very critical area requiring protection, especially when off-road riding. The other weak point I discovered is the stock aluminum handlebars. They look great, are super comfortable, and are perfectly functional. But when dropped, even in soft sand, they bend very easily from the bike's weight. My stock bars are so crooked now from dropping my bike off-road, I'm almost embarrassed if someone takes a close-up look at my bike or sits on it. There are plenty of strong aftermarket options, but again, I think Yamaha can beef up this aspect of the bike without it adding too much to the price. So that's a recap of the negatives, nothing earth-shattering and certainly nothing that should prevent you from considering the T7 as your next bike. So now let's focus on the good stuff, and there's a lot of it on this bike. When I did my review back in April, I felt that one of the T7's best features was its amazing CP2 engine. The same awesome power plant that Yamaha is using in so many of its great bikes, including the MT-07 and now the new R7. Of course it's tuned differently on the Tenere to give it a wider range of power and control for off-road use, but it's the same awesome power plant. Definitely a big selling point for the bike, no doubt. But after 5,000 miles and several decent adventure rides on this bike, I'd have to say that its best feature by far is its remarkable versatility. This bike seriously can do it all. Want to carve some asphalt twisties? Not a problem. It does it respectfully, even with 50/50 knobbies on it. Want to rip down a sandy fire road? The T7 will gobble it up. Chug through a deep water hole? No problem. Tear along a gravel road on a BDR? Easy. Pack up some travel bags and ride up Mount Washington? Been there, done that. Anything you can throw at it, the bike will do, and to me that makes it a truly awesome adventure bike, and exactly what I hoped for when I bought it. Another aspect of this bike that I really like, but that some might see as negative, is how basic it is. It was one of the first things that appealed to me when it was first introduced. The bike has very few electronic rider aids and very limited electronic controls. It has just basic ABS, a solid set of Brembo brakes, and a very basic LCD display, and that's about it. There's no traction control, rider modes, keyless starts, adjustable suspension, or other farkles that can end up getting busted or failing off-road. It's a basic setup. Basic fuel injection, cable-activated throttle and clutch, about as fundamental as motorcycle riding gets, and you'll either love it or you'll hate it. Personally, I love it. It's how riding a motorcycle was meant to be. So, we've covered the bad and good stuff. So what about those neutral aspects of the bike that are neither good nor bad? but worth knowing before you buy. Well, there are a few things in this category worth considering, and depending on how you feel about them, they could weigh in on deciding if the T7 is the right bike for you. The first one I would mention, which I don't think many T7 owners will stress enough, is the power of the bike's engine braking. It's considerably aggressive. As mentioned before, the bike has no rider modes or controls, nor does it have a slipper clutch. Combine that with the robust compression and torque of the CP2 power plant, and you get some serious engine braking power. Off-road, it's awesome, especially when navigating down gravelly loose hills. Where you need to be cautious, however, is on the street, especially if you're using 50/50 knobbies. If you downshift too aggressively, you will almost certainly lock up the back wheel. I've done it several times. Another aspect worth noting is the bike's size and height. The bike's weight is very lean for a full-featured adventure bike and only 450 pounds. But with a stock seat height of nearly 35 inches, be prepared for a shock if you're a 5'9" or less. I'm 5'8" with a 29-inch inseam, and I installed a 20mm lowering kit on the rear. I lowered the front forks by 20mm, and I installed a lower profile seat concept saddle, along with tweaking the suspension sag. Right now, the bike fits me perfectly. I can get my left foot down fully planted without having to uncomfortably shift my left hip off the seat every time I come to a stop. The height and geometry of the bike, along with its thin enduro-like width, cause the bike to lay incredibly flat when it's dropped. So even though it only weighs 450 pounds, it can be extremely difficult to pick up in rough terrain. So that's something definitely to consider, especially if you have difficulty picking up a drop motorcycle. Not unlike other adventure and off-road bikes, the T7 uses tube tires and does not come standard with a center stand. These are two important things to note, especially if you are coming from the street, where a punctured tire can be plugged fairly easily. If you plan on venturing out into difficult terrain, you will definitely want to invest in a center stand, as this is a critical accessory for changing out a punctured tube on the trail. The T7 has been coming stock with Pirelli Scorpion hybrid tires from Yamaha, and although they perform superbly on the asphalt, they are terrible off-road on anything but the hardest hardpack. They are rated as 70/30 tires, but I think realistically they're an 80/20 at best. Do yourself a favor and invest in good 50/50 tires, and you will never regret it. I run a Motage Tractionator Adventure tire on the rear and a Michelin Anarchy Wild on the front, and this setup has performed incredibly well for me both off-road and on the asphalt. So there you have it, my in-depth 5,000 mile review of my 2021 Yamaha Tenere 700. Or as I call it now, the Mule. I got off to a slow start with it, and it definitely took me several hundred miles, a few bumps and bruises, and several garage weekends to dial in all the nobbins to my liking. But I have the bike set up exactly how I like it now, and I've really grown to love it. It's an awesome bike and it really does it all, and if you're considering getting on the long wait list to get your hands on one, I say it's definitely worth it. Thanks for watching. This will be my last post for 2021, so I hope everyone has a happy and safe holiday season, and hopefully I'll see you all in 2022. Peace.